Roy Wood, a comedian that used to be on The Daily Show, now has a couple of specials on CNN, and he's done a couple of comedy specials. And in his latest comedy special, he opens up his routine with these words: "We ain't going to make it. Overall, as a society, we've lost connection." That doesn't sound like a very funny way to start a comedy show, but he spends the next hour giving story after story after story in a humorous way that supports the thesis that we have lost connection. In an interview with NPR, Roy Wood Jr. explained the name of his comedy special, Lonely Flowers, by saying this: "We are the lonely flowers. Like a flower by itself is one of the saddest things you can see, but a group of flowers together is one of the most beautiful things that you can see. We're all lonely, but man, if we come together and we got more connected, we would be so much better off." So Roy Wood Jr. uses the metaphor of a flower and a bouquet of flowers to help us understand the power of connection. What we're doing in our series called Embers today is talking about the connection that we have with one another if we're represented by the Coles. Barbecue season is coming up, and everybody else here except Chris will be barbecuing their burgers and everything else. So if you've got this grill and you put the charcoal briquettes in the middle of the grill and you light it up and they start burning and they start huddling up together, and when they're huddled up together and they're doing their thing and they're getting hot and ready to cook the meat. But if you take one of those briquettes away from the pile and set it to the side, it gets really lonely and the fire goes out. And all the other briquettes in the pot are saying, "Come back, come on back." So you move that briquette back, or you get some tongs and move it back, and you put it back in that pile, and it relights, and it does what it's supposed to do. Is Roy Wood Jr. right? Do you all think that we as a society have lost connection? The latest issue of the Atlantic magazine had this story. The cover story is the antisocial century, and the author says Americans are spending less time with other people than in any other period for which we have trustworthy data. Going back to 1965, from 2003 to 2023, it plunged by more than 20%. Now, it's not just COVID. COVID expanded the time that we spent alone and the time that we spent at home. But you would think that post-COVID, we would spend more time with other people, less time alone, less time at home. But that's not been the case. Even post-COVID, our time that we spend by ourselves in our own home has increased rather than decreased. And so the author says we are living in the anti-social century. That's a strong phrase. It doesn't just mean that we're not social. To be anti-social means we are against being social. We are opposed to being social. We don't want to be social. We fight against connection. So what is behind this anti-social culture in which we are living? Well, you know me, I find most of the answers of life in Charlie Brown. And Charles Schulz's first comic strip featuring the Peanuts gang is on October 2, 1950. Here it is. Well, here comes old Charlie Brown. Good old Charlie Brown, yes sir. Good old Charlie Brown. Well, here Charlie Brown comes down and he's popular. The kids are saying such nice things about him. He's got this wide grin on his face. He's got this air of confidence. And then you get the last frame. How I hate him. Yeah. In that moment, we know everything we need to know about Charlie Brown and about the world. That there is a lot of hate. Now remember the date of this. 1950, 75 years ago, is that right? We think there's a lot of hate now. We think that hate is something kind of new in our culture. Charlie Brown experienced in 1950. Maybe hate is nothing new. Last June, the New York Times columnist wrote an article that was entitled "Political Science Want to Know Why We Hate One Another This Much." It does seem like there was a time when we could disagree politically and not be mad at each other, not hate each other. But it seems like the disagreements today have gotten so intense and so emotionally charged. Has there ever been a time that we disagreed without hating each other? Maybe so. You know, I did not grow up in the political world. I grew up in the church world, great-grandson, grandson, and son of preachers, and a preacher myself. And I know that there's political hate, but did you know that there's some church hate too? I didn't see a lot of hate in the politics because when I was a kid, I wasn't involved in that. And obviously there is a lot of hate and violence in politics. Talking to you reminds me, your shirt says, to clean my gun. But guns are not the only metaphor, or politics are not the only time that guns are used as a metaphor or maybe as a realistic thing. This cartoon in a Christian magazine shows a board meeting of a church. The chairman says, "I think the first item on the agenda will be to unload our weapons." I've been in a few of those types of meetings. And I have experienced in church world some hate. When I was 9 years old in 1965, my dad assumed the pastorate at Forest Park Baptist Church in Joplin. For about the first year of his pastorate there, Dad received so many threats from church members that the chairman of the electric company there in Jasper County went to the church, and he installed arrowhead-type lights around our house to be turned on at nighttime to deter any of the disgruntled church members from harassing us. One Saturday night, somebody called. It's when we only had one phone in the house at that time. My older sister, 4 years older than me, answered the phone, and the voice on the other side said, "Tell your dad to resign tomorrow morning or else." It got so bad that I was taken to school in a police squad car in 4th grade. Hate in the church world. In my second pastorate as a lead pastor at the age of 28, for about 1 year, I received monthly hate letters, anonymous hate letters. I was not surprised. I kind of expected that because I grew up in the church world in which there was a lot of hate. Now, the hate was mostly directed at me because of some of the changes that I tried to make as a 28-year-old who knew it all. And you can imagine how well that went with us old people. Things like this. I tried to tell him not to change the order of service, and I did try to change the order of service. Or sometimes I received some letters about things that I said in a sermon. Can you imagine that? It's time to be prophetic, you said. No more mincing words. The pastor and his wife look out the window and see the disgruntled church members. The point is this, from Umberto Eco, a philosopher from Italy: hatred is universal and can unite people against other people. So hate is not just in politics, hate is in religion as well. So what do we do? I don't really know. It's been going on a long time. And I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of the hate. I'm working on it. And again, Charles Schulz helps us. Little Linus says, "I love mankind. It's people I can't stand." Robert Putnam is a political scientist and author. Back in 2000, he wrote the book Bowling Alone. In 2020, he did a follow-up to that book in which he talked about loneliness, and he called this book The Upswing. Notice the subtitle, How America Came Together a Century Ago and How We Can Do It Again. Wouldn't that be nice if we could come together again? In that book, both books really, Putnam describes two types of connections. He describes a bonding connection and a bridging connection. Bonding is where you connect with people just like you. So, old white men who like the Chiefs and whose favorite music is the 60s and the 70s, that's my bonding group right there. Those are people like me. The bridging group are people who are not like me. Those would be millennials and Gen Zers and Gen A'ers and people who like another kind of music, or people who have a different religion, or people who have different politics or anything like that. Those would be the bridging connection. Now, bonding connection is where you connect to people who like you, and those are people, the bonding people are people that is most natural to connect with. And we kind of focus on those bonding connections, and we find more contentment in those bonding connections because we are naturally drawn to them. We naturally are drawn to them, and we naturally feel more empathy toward those people who are bonding connectors than we do with people with whom we have to build a bridge. When you get sick, the most likely group to bring you chicken soup are people in your bonding group. And so there is very good bonding, but there's also very dangerous bonding. The KKK is a bonding group. So the bonding group can do some good, but the bonding group, the KKK and other white supremacist groups, they're bonded together because they're just alike. They can do some real harm as well. So Putnam says this in his books, bridging is harder to build than bonding. That's the challenge as I see it in America today. I agree with that. Do you? It's hard to build the bridges with people that are different than us. But that's where I can be inspired by and learn from the life of Jesus. It seems like his entire life that we have a record of was spent in building these bridging connections. Jesus built a bridge across gender barriers. Jesus gave a woman the role of testifying to his resurrection in a time, in a culture in which women were not even allowed to testify in court. Jesus built a bridge across religious barriers. He made a Samaritan, a person who practiced a different religion than Judaism, the hero of a story, and he made the Jewish priest the villains of the story. We know that story as the Good Samaritan. And he even told the hearers of that story that if they wanted eternal life, they had to live like the Samaritan, not like the Jews. Jesus built bridges across age barriers when he told a group of adults that if they wanted to experience the kingdom of God, they had to go to kids' venue. They had to be like children. And then Jesus built barriers or bridges across racial barriers. I want to show you a story that kind of causes me a little bit of disruption in my own mind. In this story, he meets a Canaanite woman who comes to Jesus because her child is sick. He wants Jesus to heal the child. And Jesus' response is very un-Jesus-like. The woman came and knelt before him, "Lord, help me." And he replied, "It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." He just called her a dog. He refused to help her because she was a Canaanite woman. Now, we imagine Jesus as a kind, open-minded, compassionate, inclusive being. There's nothing inclusive about this. There's nothing kind about his response. There's nothing compassionate about it. Now, some preachers will try to make an excuse for Jesus, that Jesus was just trying to test her faith. But just what if he wasn't? What if what he said is what he meant? What if Jesus was reflecting a prejudice against the Canaanite people that reflected the prejudice that other Jewish people had against the Canaanites in that time and in that place? But notice what happens next. Well, yes, it is, Lord, she said, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus said to her, Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted, and her daughter was healed at that moment. Jesus changed his mind. The Jesus at the end of the story is different than the Jesus at the beginning of the story. What changed? What happened? Is it possible, just maybe, that this woman changed Jesus' mind? That this woman caused Jesus to see his own prejudice, his own exclusive attitude? Maybe this was a aha moment for Jesus. Now, I know what you might be thinking, that I'm kind of dissing Jesus here. I'm diminishing what our concept is of Jesus. But maybe not. We all know that it takes a lot of courage to admit that you're wrong. Could it be that maybe Jesus modeled for us 2,000 years ago what we're learning today, and that is that true courage requires vulnerability? So maybe in this story, Jesus is teaching us that the willingness to be vulnerable, to grow from our experience and to change. If Jesus can change, I think maybe we can too. So bridging begins with the idea that everyone has a story. And if we take the time to know the other person's story, we'd all be better off. Bridging is saying to the other person, I want to hear why you are here, and more importantly, I want to hear why you're suffering. Why are you where you are on this position, on this issue? I want to hear why. I want to hear your story, what led you here. I want to close today with a clip of some people who were trying to build some bridges to one another. And hopefully I'll be inspired to build some bridges myself. Take a look. Some of my best friends, not very many, just a handful, are bridge friends, not bonding friends. Biggest difference that we have with each other are our politics. Something that creates maybe one of the largest chasms in our culture. But we built a bridge. And one individual in particular would treat me and Denise as a bonding friend, not as a bridging friend. Rides to the airport, chicken soup when we're sick. I know that bridging is possible, and changing how we see the other is possible. Let's just make it happen. Let's make it happen. I think even today, maybe I could like a Bills fan. I don't know. We'll see.